During the first part of Journey to the West, that's when it tells exactly how Kong ended up trapped under the mountain because of Buddha. At a certain point in the story, when Kong had already passed through the king's palace, dragon, god, and he took his magic staff, got the magic armor, and also some shoes there that allowed him to walk on the clouds. He ended up going on a journey around the world and meeting several people, or rather, several beings like him. And among them, he met 6 beings whom he considered extremely powerful and became great friends with them. According to the journey, these 6 beings, along with Kung, ended up forming a brotherhood, right? Basically, they became sworn brothers. They became Wukong's brothers. And when Wukong started fighting with the gods and the heavens and proclaimed himself the great sage equal to heaven, his 6 brothers did the same thing, so they wouldn't be left behind. I'll try to recall the names of Wukong's 6 brothers from memory. I might mix them up, but you'll see the correct ones as the video continues. They were the Salamander King, the Rock King, the Camel King, the Lion King, the Macaque King, the Bull King, and Wukong himself, of course, right? That makes 7 of them. Throughout the whole story, it is implied that these 6 brothers of Wukong are among the few beings in the world who could actually stand up to him in strength and skill. It's no wonder that Wukong wanted to be part of this group and become friends with them. Basically, most of the time, they would gather this group at the Mountain of Flowers and Fruit, have big banquets, spend several days there, indulging in various pleasures, and talking about war, battles, and politics. They were really great friends and got along very well, at least up to this point, because later on, some things end up happening in the story. Well, those kings there, just like Wukong himself, were called kings and demons. I mean, they're not exactly demons, right? I think demons came from the translation, but I think the right word would be Yaoguai. They would be mythological monsters from China. In fact, Wukong himself is considered a Yaoguai. So now let's talk about this mythological group, the 7 great sages. And remember, you can also be a great sage by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and everything else you already know. Consider becoming a channel member for less than 8 Ries. It's painless and really helps me here. Besides getting early access to new videos and also access to exclusive videos, like the ones showing up on the screen, and on top of that, your name would be immortalized here in the video, just like the ones that are appearing now. You can also help by buying products shown on the screen, like the PS5, the book Journal of the West, and other mythology books I'll list for you. Check out the pinned comment too. Using those links and clicking the products helps me a lot, thanks.
He practiced his martial arts, visited many heroes, used his magical powers, and built a large and distinguished circle of friends. He met with the 6 sworn brothers, the Demon Bull King, the Demon Salamander King, the Demon Rock King, the Camel King, the Macaque King, and the Lion King. Including himself, they made 7. For days on end, they talked about politics and war, passed the cup, played music, sang, played the flute, danced, rehearsed together, and enjoyed themselves in every possible way.
Well, let's start here then with the Demon Salamander King. Actually, I'm calling him Salamander here because that's the version I was going to use. But he can also be called something much cooler, which is the Demon Dragon King. He is the 2nd oldest of the sworn brothers. And when Kong came back from the heavens, all proud, showing off and proclaiming himself the great sage equal to heaven, the Demon Dragon King then called himself the great sage who stirs the seas. But all right, he proclaimed himself. He was big there, right? The great sage of the seas. But when the police from the Jade Emperor, the gods, decided to come down to teach him a lesson. As for Wukong, who knows what happened to the greatest Salamander King because he never appears in the story again, he just remained as part of Kong's past. No one knows exactly what happened to him. He vanished, he disappeared, he took off from there.
I would be the great sage who stirs the seas, said the king.
Demon.
Salamandra. All 6 demon kings created their own titles as they wished, and for the rest of the day they did nothing but drink and have fun.
The second one I want to mention is Demon King Rock. Its name doesn't refer to rock music, but comes from the legend of the rock bird. That's a gigantic bird with unbelievable strength. And according to the legends, when it spreads its wings, it can even block out the sun itself. By the way, Demon King Rock also has an extremely cool form, because he's basically an anthropomorphic eagle wearing Chinese combat attire. It's really awesome. But anyway, when Wukong and the Salamander King end up proclaiming themselves great sages, Rock, of course, doesn't want to be left out. and proclaims himself the great sage who tames rocks. In other words, he would be the tamer of those gigantic birds. However, while researching, I ended up discovering that depending on the translation, the title of Demon Rock changes. It can also be Great Sage who confuses the heavens. Even though that title is really cool and very respectable, I still prefer the idea of them having a tamer of rocks. Because I imagine him leading an army of those birds. They definitely would have helped Kong a lot in his war against the heavens if the rock hadn't disappeared too, right? Because just like King Salamander, nobody knows what happened to him. After he proclaimed himself a sage, he doesn't show up in the story anymore. Although King Rock doesn't appear in the story anymore, sometime later, another rock demon with golden wings ends up appearing as an antagonist to Kong and his group, the Monkey King, the great Sage Rio.
The Rock Demon King will be the great sage tamer of rocks. All the Demon Kings created their own titles as they wished, and for the rest of the day they did nothing but drink and have fun.
Next, I'll discuss the Camel Demon King, the sixth oldest of these sworn brothers. However, it's important to tell you something. In the version I read, he is referred to as the Camel King. But according to other versions and other translations, this Camel King is replaced by the short-snouted Monkey King. In the case when he is this little monkey, they say his head looks like a ghost's. It would be a monkey's head, but bigger and with red eyes. And because of this image of him, he would have called himself the Great Sage, the sage who scares the gods. Now, when it comes to the Camel King, he called himself the Great Sage who moves mountains. But whether it's a camel or a little monkey with a ghost head, neither of them helps Kong much beyond this moment and the parties they throw on the mountain of flowers and fruit. Well, both of them disappear too, and also, both of them disappear and aren't mentioned anymore. Which is kind of funny, right? The little monkey called himself the Great Sage who frightens the gods, but he was the one who ran away. Because when the gods came down from heaven, he disappeared and didn't even care about Kong. Well, next up here is the Macaque Demon King, and I said macaque here, not monkey, okay? Because the Monkey King here refers to Kong himself. What makes the two only slightly different, besides the fact that Kong has been immortal several times, is that the term monkey is basically used throughout the story to describe all the primates that appear there. And Kong would be different because, he ended up emerging from a divine rock and eventually ascended to the king of the monkeys in a divine way. When this Monkey King is a leader, yes, but only of another tribe of monkeys. Anyway, trying to imitate Kong as well, he called himself the Macaque Demon King, the king of the five senses. Although in other translations, he's called the Great Sage who distorts the winds or informs the winds, something like that. Just like the other sages I mentioned here, he also disappears from the story. But it's kind of interesting to see that there really are other monkeys just as powerful, like Kong in Journey to the West. And for you who might be finding this boring, right? You might be saying, man, these characters just give themselves titles and then disappear and none of them show up again. Don't worry, because some of them actually become really important in the story later on. I'll tell you about that here. The Monkey King, the Great Sage, laughed. The Macaque Demon King will then be the Great Sage, the king of the five senses. And next up is the Lion Demon King, who also has a really cool name. Just imagine a lion demon with Chinese armor. That's already awesome. The title he chose for himself is also really cool, because he called himself the Great Sage, Guide of Spirits. Unfortunately, yes, he also disappeared from the story. Although later on, in the West Journey Journal, other lion demons appear who are extremely powerful, like the Blue Lion Demon, who is extremely powerful. And some even say that this lion who appears later in the story would be Wukong's sworn brother. But I don't think so. They're very different things. But it's also important to tell you that depending on the version of the story, the name of this Demon King here ends up changing, right? Going from Lion Demon King to Camel Lion Demon King, combining two of the beings I mentioned here and calling himself the Great Sage who moves mountains. Well, the sixth sage I'm going to talk about here is Wukong himself, which everyone must already know, right? The Monkey King, who was born from a mythical stone. He became immortal several times and caused a huge mess in heaven, because when they wanted to put him up there, making him part of the celestial court and giving him a title to kind of calm him down, they made him the caretaker of the celestial stables. Of course, he didn't like that at all. He walked around heaven, took pills, fished for immortality, and then ended up being kicked out from up there. And because of that, and with a lot of anger, he called himself the great sage equal to heaven. And unlike most of his brothers, who ran away, Wukong ended up facing the celestial army, and he beat up several gods, like Nezha, for example. I even made a video about him here on the channel recently. But later, he ended up being captured with the help of Erlang Shen. And even then, when they captured him, they tried to kill him by putting him in the celestial furnace. Wukong ended up getting out of there and broke the celestial furnace. That made several parts of the furnace fall to the earth. And I kept that information because it's important for the next great sage I'm going to talk about here, which is the Demon Bull King. After escaping from the furnace, Wukong caused several other problems, until they had to call Buddha himself, Siddhartha Gautama, to imprison Wukong under a mountain, or actually under 5 mountains, right? Because he used the 5 fingers of Buddha's hand, which in this case were 5 mountains. After that, Tang Senzang, who was the monk chosen to take the scriptures to the west, freed Wukong to help him on the journey. And then we have the rest of Wukong's journey. Excellent, excellent. From today on, call me only by this name, Great Sage equal to heaven. You should no longer call me Monkey King, but Great Sage equal to heaven. Well, now we've come to the Demon King Yu, or just King Yu, or even known in Dragon Ball as King Ox. And yes, King Ox is based on King Yu from Journey to the West. Their stories are also quite similar, and of all these sages I've mentioned here, except for Wukong, of course, King Yu is the most well-known of them all. He's one of the most famous Journey to the West characters due to his story. Anyone who's played Black Manta and Wukong knows what I mean, since he appears in the story. And even his story is briefly told in the game. Well, his story starts in a way similar to the others. He's there and ends up being recruited by Wukong to be part of their Brotherhood. After all, Wukong recognizes him as a very powerful being. And when Wukong ends up getting into trouble with the heavens and declares himself the great sage equal to heaven, King Toro declares himself the great sage who dishonors heaven. But, unlike the others, his story doesn't end there. During the 500 years that Wukong was trapped under the mountain, King Toro ended up prospering a lot. He built a great castle, had a large estate, and married a princess named Eafan, or in Portuguese, which is actually kind of funny, Princess Iron Fan. She was a demon princess who had a magic fan that could put out any fire and also create storms. Well, by now you must be connecting this to the story of King Kuteru in Dragon Ball. When we meet him there, he also needs a magic fan to put out the fire on the mountain where he lives. Well, Princess Iron Eafan and King Toro had a son named Red Boy, or Redeemer Boy, who has a devastating power called Samadhi Fire. But King Toro was also a bit naughty and ended up getting a lover named Princess with a taste for jade. He even started living on another property on another mountain. But King Toro had no idea that he would end up meeting Kong again. After Kong is freed from the mountain by Tang Senzang and so on, the journey to the west begins. He ends up encountering the Red Boy, who attacks Tang Senzang and also Kong. Kong even almost dies because of this boy. Almost dying, burned by the brutal fire and the brutal power that the boy had. So Kong asks Bodhisattva Guanyin for help. She comes down, takes the boy, and makes him her disciple. And even though in a way the boy is saved by Guanyin, Princess Eafan and King Toro end up hating Kong for this because they see it as kidnapping. In a way, they weren't wrong. Well, anyway, Kong's group arrives at the mountains that are on fire. The mountain of King Toro was on fire. Do you remember that Kong broke the furnace up in the sky? And then the pieces of the furnace fell to the earth? Well, they fell exactly on King Toro's mountain. And the only way to put out this fire is by using Princess Eafan's fan. Kong then goes to the princess and earnestly asks her to give him the fan. Of course, she doesn't give it to Kong. She even uses the fan to push Kong away. But then Kong ends up getting the magic amulet, which is kind of like Buri. Love that wind there. He gets there again in the form of an insect, enters Princess Jade's belly, and forces her to give him the fan. But when Kong takes this fan and tries to use it, he finds out it's a fake fan. In fact, it makes the mountain's fire, the fire on the mountain, even stronger. Kong's only option then is to talk again with his sworn brother, King Toro. Of course, he's not going to give Kong any fan. They're going to end up fighting. They're going to get into a brawl. And incredibly, this was one of the toughest battles Kong ever fought, because King Toro had unbelievable strength. After all, the two are very similar, in physical strength, in transformations, and even in martial arts. Right in the middle of this battle, Zuba ends up helping Kong too, and the two of them manage to kill King Toro's lover right there, and they invade his castle. At that moment, King Toro goes crazy, and he decides to use his true form. A gigantic bull, white and with iron horns. And since the battle was already reaching almost apocalyptic proportions, the guys from the heavens decide to intervene. Then Neza, Prince Neza, arrives with the celestial army to put an end to the fight there, and Neza, using his fire wheels. He starts cutting off the Bull King's head there, but every time the head keeps growing back, until the Bull King gets tired and decides to surrender, and he converts to Buddhism. He also gives up the fan there, from his wife to the monk so they can pass through the mountain. The Bull King ends up being taken for judgment, bringing the story to a close, of the greatest one, sworn brother of Wukong.
I've disciplined him.
Your boy.
I've given it away. Your wife's friend. Today, I'll take it with me too. Find the master and serve the right one. It's the only path left for people like us. Don't you understand, brother?
I'll take. The Monkey King, the great sage, laughed. Our eldest brother, the Demon Bull King, will be the great sage who dishonors the heavens, he said. All 6 demon kings created their own titles as they wished, and for the rest of the day they did nothing but drink and have fun, seeing Sun Wukong approaching with the iron staff. The Bull King looked up and said sadly, "Brother, spare my flesh and bones. I have already surrendered to the Western Buddhas. Go, raid my cave and order my wife to hand over the iron fan. Willingly, so you can cross the mountain. If you've watched this far, please like, subscribe, and share. See you next time."